So welcome back. I'm so glad you can join me. Well, today we're going to look at a much better improved crouch. Now, I know in my last video I said I wasn't going to do these character improvement videos in order, but this crouch has been really bugging me. So I started looking around and I did find a solution. So this fellow by the name of Devin Sherry posted a video about 5 years ago with this solution. It's actually very, very clever. And I do want to give him full credit. He gets us about 99.9% of the way there. So I do want to give a shout out to Devin. Now, I haven't seen Devin produce videos for Unreal in a while. I hope he's okay. Maybe he's moved on to other things. But I just wanted to thank him for this. So this is what he built, and I've recreated it here. And it's actually very interesting. He just uses a couple of timelines for the crouch up and down. And then he uses this line trace, which I thought was very clever. And what he's doing here is he's drawing a line trace from the first-person camera upwards. We can see this up vector for 70 units. And he's sensing if there's anything above the first-person camera. And as long as it's colliding with something, these line traces, it's staying in that crouch position. So let me just demonstrate it. It's a little bit easier to see. Here it is here, and if we hit our control key, we do crouch, and we come underneath here, and I can release the control key, and you can see I'm still in my crouch, and that's kind of a rather nice mechanic. But there is a couple of little wrinkles in what he's done here. Now, I sort of recreated what he did, and I kind of solved the problem myself. And then I went back to that thread later on, and I did find that a couple of people did suggest these changes, so I do want to give that some credit too. So I do want to give a shout out to Radical Alexander and Lion Roar. They suggested these changes as well, so we all kind of found these solutions contemporaneously, if you will. But there it is, and the fix is super easy. Now let me just show you the wrinkles in what Devin created here. So if we go into it, and we press our control key the first time, we see we get our nice smooth crouch and uncrouch. But then when we hit it subsequent to that, we're back to our kind of herky-jerky kind of crouch. So that's kind of the first wrinkle in it. And the second wrinkle in it is when we come down here, it works great as long as we're looking straight ahead. But once we look down, it pops out of that animation and then we get stuck. And no big deal, we can just hit the crouch key again, but it's not quite what we're looking for. So if the player looks down, it comes out of the crouch. And the reason for that is, if we go into the first-person character, what Devin did was he's drawing that line trace from that first-person camera. So obviously when it tilts down, then the line trace is coming out from the top, so it's drawing it horizontally. Now I can just illustrate that real quick. If we come into this line trace by channel, let's go to persistent just so we can see the line traces. And let's go back into the map and play. So now when we press control, we've got our line traces and we can kind of see them there in space. There it is there. You can just barely see it. It's a little red line. When we come underneath here, we can see the line tracing going straight up from the camera there, right? And when we get that little red box, we can see it's colliding. So it's telling the first-person character, hey, stay in your crouch. But when we look down, what happens is our line trace goes horizontally. We can just see it there. So it's not colliding with anything. We're not going to get a little red box. So that's the problem there. Now the solution is really quick, and we'll build this step by step in just a minute. But to fix those two little quirks in this, it's really easy. Out of our flip-flop, we can just break this line here. Instead of going into play, we can go to play from start. And we do the same thing down here out of this branch. We can just break that. Instead of coming out of the false and into play, we'll go play from start. And that'll solve that intermittent smooth movement. And then finally, instead of drawing the line trace out of the first-person camera, we can draw that out of the capsule component, just like that. The reason being that capsule component always keeps its upright orientation, irrespective of the way the camera's pointing. So that works a little bit better. So those two little fixes kind of brings us up to speed here. So again, this is not a video to bash Devin. Devin did a fantastic job. Very clever solution, and he got us 99% of the way there. So those two little fixes get us going. So we can see here, if I press the control key, we've got our smooth up and down in perpetuity every time now. So that's fixed. Then when we come down here, we can look down and we still stay in our crouch. And we can see that every single line trace is straight up and down. So that's the fix to Devin's solution there. So let's have a look at doing this step by step here, and let's get through this crouch. Okay, so let's start building this. I'm just going to pop open that quadruple A Tom character project. That's the one I've set aside for my improved character. So we're just going to get into that project real quick. So there it is there. We're going to go into our root folder. We're going to go first person blueprints, and we're going to pop open that first person character. And let's just make sure it's docked up here so we can jump back and forth from our map to our first person character. So here we are. This is leftover from the last video. First thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that cheesy crouch. So let's just go ahead and delete that. And we didn't comment our player run, so let's just do that right now. Player run. Okay, there we are there. Now, to begin this wiring process, we're going to actually create a couple of variables. That's what we're going to start with here. So I'm going to come up here and drag in our capsule component. We just drag that right in there. We're going to drag off of this, and we're going to get capsule half height. Let's just click on that and bring that in there. And to create our first variable, we're just going to drag off of here, and promote to variable, we're just going to click on that. And we can name that variable, let's see here, character full height, let's say, enter. And then we created a variable. And if we look down here, we can see it's created it here where my mouse is hovering, character full height. So there it is there. The other thing we want to add here is an event begin play. So there it is there, and we just want to wire that straight up into here. And what we're doing here is, in addition to creating this character full height variable, we're setting that variable based on this capsule half height. And that capsule half height is default of 96. So when the game starts, it's setting this variable character full height as being 96. So that's very important to get that right out of the way. And what we're going to do now is create another variable. And we can just come here to add new, click that, and let's do a variable. And we can name that variable, let's see here, crouch height. All right, come on now, crouch height. There it is there. And we want to make sure that it is a float. So let's just click here, float. And there it is there. Now we can't put a value in until we compile. So let's just go ahead and compile. Then it gives us this option here to put in a value. And because the capsule height is 96, for our crouch, we're going to set that at about half. So let's go 48. Let's hit enter, compile, and save. Okay, so we've established those two, and we can see them down here. Character full height, crouch height. So we've got our two variables. Okay, so that's done. All right, so first thing we want to do is we want to select what button, keyboard button we want to crouch. So we'll just go left crouch, and we know how to do this. We've seen how to do this in a past video. Next I'm going to put in here is a flip-flop, and that's kind of a cool name for this little thing. Flip-flop. There we go. Let's put that in. And a flip-flop, all that does is when it gets an input, it just toggles between two sort of outputs, and we can just wire those two straight in there. Just like that. Okay, so that's a good start. Let's drag out of this A channel and let's add a timeline. So there it is there. Let's put that in there. Let's name this, oh, I don't know, say crouch animation. There we go. And let's double click it and open it. And what we want to do is create a flow track. And all we're doing is creating kind of a track that takes us from 0 to 1 in a smooth motion. And let's call that, oh, I don't know, player crouched, and hit enter. And our length, Devin set it at 0.3, which is pretty good. We're going to make it our own. We're going to say 0.5. Let's put in a couple of keyframes. So shift left mouse button twice. Let's click on the first one, and we'll put a time of 0 and a value of 0 to start with. Let's click the second one. We'll put a value of 0.5, which is what we've established, how long it's going to take for the crouch to happen. And we just want a value of 1 for the value. So there it is there. Let's adjust our scale so we can see both of them. This one's already selected. Let's select this one, control left mouse button, so they're both selected. And we can just hit the 1 key and it's going to give us that nice smooth motion. So there it is there. Let's compile and save it. Okay, let's go back into the timeline. Oh, sorry, the event graph. And that's set up. So when we press our left control key, the first thing we want to do is adjust the player movement. So let's adjust that because we want to make it about, well, we want to have it slower when it's crouched. So I'm going to come down here to character movement. So let's see here where we've got it down here. It should be down here, my character. Okay, if it's not showing up in my character, you've got to come up here and hit the show inherited variable. So there it is there. And it's in the character, there it is there, character movement. So let's just drag that guy in here. We'll get the character movement. Let's drag it out of here And then what we're going to do is we're going to set max walk speed. All right, so there it is there. And let's set that at 300, about half the walk speed. The default walk speed is 300 in the game, so let's set that up. Okay, so that's there. Now we want to drag off this crouch animation from this finished and put that into the max walk speed. So when we're crouched, we're walking a little bit slower. Okay, so that's done. We have to put in a lerp next. So that's a linear interpolation. So there it is there, a lerp. And lerp just takes two inputs and kind of interpolates the two of them. It's kind of a very, very basic explanation of it. So there it is there. So for our inputs, what we want to do is grab those two variables that we created before. So let's put in our character full height there, get, and let's put that in the A channel. And then let's get our other variable, our crouch height, drag that guy in there, get, and let's connect him to the A channel. And then for our alpha, what we want to do is drag off this update. No, I'm sorry, we want to go crouched, player crouched. And we know that because we've got green little tabs here, so, and we can just go there. So that's done. And let's just tidy this up by moving this up here. There we go. Now, out of our lerp, we want to come out of the return value. And we want to set capsule half height, and we want to make sure that it's signifying the capsule component. So when we put that in there, it actually puts the capsule component in for us. So that's perfect there. So that's coming out of the return value. That's going into the target. And then the final thing we have to do out of this update here in the crouch animation, I want to drag that into that input there. So, and can we tidy this up a little bit just so it's not all crisscrossing? Let's grab this, put it down here, just so it's a little bit clear. You know, I kind of like to have it as clean as I can. We can tidy it up a little bit later, but let's just kind of do it a little bit here. Okay, that's not bad. It's not great. All right, so if we compile and save this, now we should have at least the beginning of our crouch. Let's have a quick look. So here it is there. So when we press the control key, it does crouch down nicely, but that's all it does. It gets stuck. So let's finish that off. Now, to finish that off, all we need to do is grab the whole works here. Let's hit Control-C for copy. Let's go down to an empty area here and Control-V. And that's our uncrouch. And now we have to just fix a couple of things. We want to rename this timeline because it gave us that, that default name. So let's go uncrouch animation. There it is there. And we just have to change these two things here. So let's just get this out of the way. Let's move this guy up here just so it's kind of clear, and move this up here. So all we have to do here is just change the order of these two. So let's break these two traces there and there. Let's move this guy up here, and we'll just put this like that. And they're just the opposite of what we did here, right? Just the opposite. And then the last thing we have to do is from our flip-flop, from our B, we want to go to play from start. And in fact, we did the mistake here. We want to have this flip-flop A channel to play to start. Okay, and that's all we need. And we've got our crouch and uncrouch here, but we're not quite finished, and I'll show you why. So here we are on the map. Let's go ahead and play that. Now when we hit our control key, we crouch nicely, we release it, we uncrouch nicely, and that's a nice movement. It takes about 0.5 seconds. It might be a little bit slow. I think that's why Devin put it at 0.3. The only wrinkle is when we release it, we get stuck, right? So we have to keep it depressed, and that's not quite what we want. So we want to put in this line trace. So let's go ahead and have a look and see how to do that. So we're back in our event graph, and we're just going to add that line trace. One thing we did forget to do is when we uncrouch, we want to get our player max walk speed back to 600. So we're just going to come down here and put that to 600. So we forgot to do that in our uncrouch animation. So let's do that right now. The other thing we're going to do is we're just going to take this line here and just lose it, just so we know that we have to connect that to our line trace. So to create a line trace, we use a little component here called, let's see here, where is it? Line trace by channel. And there's a bunch of different line traces we can use. We'll just use the by channel one for now. And basically a line trace, it's going to draw a line inside the 3D map space. And we have to define where that line starts, where it ends, what direction, and that line senses collision. And that's handy here because what we're saying is whenever we collide with something over top of the player, we want to stay in our crouched position. And I'll demonstrate that a little bit more, and it'll hopefully become a little bit more clear. If you're not familiar with line traces, there are videos on YouTube that explain that. So if you do want to watch one of those real quick to get familiar with it, I don't want to explain it too much in this video because we're just looking at the crouch, but it's actually a very clever way of solving it, and my hat's off to Devin for using that. So there it is there. So let's define where we want to start our line. So what we can do for that is let's get our first person camera from here, and let's just drag that in there. Then what we want to do is drag off of that, and we want to get our world location. So there it is there. And then we just simply drag that into our start value, just that simple. So our line is going to start at our first person camera, and that's very, very common in many usages for line tracing. So there it is there. Now to end our line, we want to do something a little bit different than what Devin did. Rather than using the first person camera, I'm going to use the capsule component. That's because, again, the capsule component orientation is always straight up and down, irrespective of how we position the camera. So that's a much better way to start our line trace. So there's our our capsule component. We're going to drag out of that, and we're going to get world rotation. Get world rotation. And that's going to allow us to point our line trace upwards. So there's that, and we're going to drag out of here, and now we're going to get up vector. And there it is there. All right. Now we can go straight in our return value into our end, but that's just going to give us a line trace of 1 unit, which isn't very helpful. So we want to multiply that. So let's get that out here. So let's drag this out, and I'm just going to hit the Shift 8 key, the number 8, to get that asterisk, so that multiplication. So there it is there. And since we're going to a vector to a float, we want to go vector times float. There it is there. Now we can set this value at anything. Devin had it at 70, and that's fine. And the only caveat here is just make sure that whatever geometry is over top of the character when he crouches, it's less than 70. And we established that at 175 in the last video. So 70 will serve us fine. So we can just leave that at 70. And then finally what we'll want to do is we've got to add not only that up vector, but also our original world location. So how we do that is we drag out of here, and we can hit the Shift plus key. And then what we want to do here is add vector plus vector. So there it is there. Now we don't want to cross the current, they call it. So we're just going to break this line here, and we're going to actually shift it down to here. And then what we want to do is off this return value here, off this get world location, we're going to come down to the plus. So we'll come down to here. And then the final thing we have to do is come out of this addition pin, and then that's our end point. Oops. And that's going to be our end point. So we've got our line trace, and the final thing we have to do is we have to actually sort of initiate that line trace. So we want to come out of our B channel on our flip-flop and put it into there. And this is just, we're going to get our line trace right now. Okay, so there, that's wired up. Now, on the other side of this line trace, what we have to do is a couple of things. So let's just grab this and push it out of the way a little bit here. Okay, there it is there. So we've got this done, we've got that done. Okay, fantastic. Now what we want to do is come out of here on our line trace channel, and basically we want to put in a branch. So let's go ahead and put that in there. And let's make sure that this return value is wired to that red condition. Very important to have that there. So what we're saying here is that if we're drawing a line trace and that value is true, we want to come out to a delay, simple delay, and point to is fine. And once that delay is completed, we want to come back into that line trace like that. Okay, that's good. Now if our line trace hits something, we want to keep drawing that line trace. Okay. Now if it doesn't hit something and it registers false, we're going to come out of here, go from false into play from start, and we want to hit our uncrouch. So if our line trace isn't colliding with anything, then we want to uncrouch. Okay, that's exactly what we want to do there. Alright, so let me just make sure this is wired, our false is to there. And then the last thing we have to do, which we did there, okay, so that goes into there. Okay, well that's all we need to do. Let's just move this out of the way here just to make it a little bit more clear. Okay, so that's probably clear as mud, but that's how to wire it. So let's have a look at the compile and save. And let's go into the map and save. And now we should have our nice smooth crouch, which is there. And when we come out of the crouch, we go back to our normal walk speed. And when we come into our crouch, now I'm not pressing the crouch button, and it's keeping that crouch animation at a crouch speed, even when we look down. So, okay, so we fixed that. Now, one thing we can do is if we go into that line trace, we can come down here into debug type and go into persistent, so we can actually see the line traces. So let's go into there, let's play it. Now if we press our control key, it's going to shoot up a line trace and we can see it there. We can just barely see it. And the length is 70. And it's not colliding with anything because it doesn't have a little green, a little red square at the end. Now see what I'm getting at here in a moment. Okay, so if we come down here and crouch, you see it's creating that line trace and we're getting that red box which is saying it's colliding. So that line trace is saying, hey, we're colliding with something, so stay crouched. And what we can see here too is if I look down, okay, we can see that our line trace now is still straight up because again our capsule does not look down. So alright, so there it is there. So let's just get back into our first person character and let's just hide those line traces again. So alright, well there it is. I'm not sure I explained it that great, but if you follow along with the way it's wired, it does work very, very well and it gives us that very, very nice smooth motion. So our little character is shaping up great. We've got a little, let's see here, fire. That's our custom projectile. We have a nice smooth crouch now. And our crouch mechanic is such that we only have to press it once and it stays in the crouch. And when we get from underneath obstacle, it goes back into our uncrouch animation and we're back to our 600 run speed, so, or walk speed. So there it is. So I do want to thank Devin again for getting us most of the way there. I stood basically on his shoulders to build this. And with a couple of little improvements, we've got our player much better now and a beautiful smooth crouch. And if you don't like the speed of that crouch, you can always adjust it. So, all right, there's your crouch.